What's up, Grove Young Adults? Welcome, Grove Young Adults. You're probably thinking, who is this stranger? Let me introduce you to him. This is Tim Nellis. And so Tim and I work together at Calvary Church of Santa Ana for probably
That's right.
almost 5 years. And not only are you one of my dear friends, but someone who invested into me and into my life and has made a big impact on my life. So Grove Young Adults, as you know, we've brought in a few different people, heard from some different voices, and we had Tim lined up for this week. So obviously a lot going on in the world,
Right.
and Young Adults just want to make sure that you know, if you haven't listened to our lead pastor, Daniel Bishop, he did a sit down with some families at our church that was really encouraging, really helpful, really insightful. So I just want to, again, encourage young adults, if you haven't listened to that, to do that. But again, man, we are all learning and listening and making sure that we kind of are demonstrating some humility in this season so that we can move toward Christ-likeness. Tim, man, we're just going to jump right into this topic. And the topic that we're going to jump in today affects a lot of what's going on in the world too. So I'm excited to get there for a little bit. But the topic is basically the difference between behavior modification and heart transformation. So Tim, this is something that is close to your heart, something that really is kind of like motivated you. And I have seen personally the benefit of you serving and ministering to people, discipling people, with this at the forefront of your mind and heart. So just jump into it. Why is this important? How did this come up? I mean, all the things. Just go for it. Talk to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you told me to bring up an idea or a subject, like this came straight to my mind, and then everything hit. Like this was pre-George Floyd. This was like, and then everything changed, and it's like, oh, is this still a relevant topic? And I was just thinking, it's so relevant. It's so relevant in every season, no matter what's happening. And it is like part of the core, I think, of who we are. And I think one of the reasons why it's relevant to me personally is because I was really, really good at modifying my behavior. I had an art of it. I like worked on it like so much of my life. My parents were missionaries, so I grew up, and I was not the rebellious missionary kid. I was the ideal, we'll make this work, and I want to please you type missionary kid. And so we were there in southern Mexico for a few years, spent 3 years in Dallas, and then did the majority of my growing up in Orange County. And so during all this time, I think I had always kind of attributed my relationship with God and my ability to be a good human with how my behavior was. And what I started to discover as I became a man and a husband and a father, that modifying my behavior, it left me so like empty and searching and really like feeling disappointed with myself, because I was constantly not measuring up to the standard which I believed God required and the standard that I wanted to be. And so I constantly was dealing with guilt and shame. I was constantly just disappointed in myself. And then there's this new idea, and it came through like a couple of influencers. One is Tim Keller. And I think Tim Keller just got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
And it like not very many people that I've like kind of have spoken into my life, not out of books or, podcasts, have like what happens to them has really affected me, but this one kind of affects me. And I think it's because a lot of his stuff really helped me to understand that modifying my behavior, it doesn't do anything in light of creating real change. Wow. And what I need is to have my heart change. And there's this guy, a Professor Biola, kind of put it this way. He said that imagine that your heart has taste buds, and it naturally likes certain things. And so like I was thinking about that, like sugar. You don't have to convince someone to like sugar, right? You have your kid in their first birthday, you give them their first taste of, like some people do this, their first taste of sugar, right? And cake. And it's not like they taste it and they're like, ugh, right?
Yeah.
just like, it's all over their face. They can't get more. And then that dopamine hit nails you and you're like, sugar for life.
Yes.
And in the same way, our heart is drawn towards things. And most of those things are self-centered. And most of those things are self-protective. And most of those things are things that we are trying to satisfy the deep longings within us. And so we just go hard after them. So our heart wants those things. But most of those things are not, a lot of those things are not in God's design for us as humans to have at the forefront. And they've become really destructive, and they lead you to empty wells that you like go in looking for something to quench your thirst, and all you get is dry dirt. And
wow.
So I think that whole idea and that process, that I don't have the ability to control what my heart likes. And so I used to think, okay, so I need to change what my heart likes. So the way I'm going to do it is by removing something from my life that is destructive. So imagine if I was on a diet and I'm realizing that sugar and carbs are not the way to like look good for my house budget, or whatever you guys are going to be partaking in your beach day or whatever. And so you're like, I'm going to eliminate like sugar and carbs. They're like the devil. And so you're like, you cut them out of your diet. You distance yourself from them. No more soda. You say no to the donuts on Sunday morning. Like, you're being super good. But the thing is that you haven't stopped liking sugar and carbs. You have just tried to remove them out of your life so that they aren't present. Dang. And the crazy thing is if you want to do any semblance of normal life with people, like if you go on a missions trip, right? And on your missions trip, the little lady in the town like invites you over for dinner, and she has like homemade bread, and then she made like this, like local dessert that has lots of sugar in it, and they put a Coca-Cola in front of you. And you're like, no, I don't do sugar and carbs. Like, that's not like a realistic thing, right? It's not like you can all of a sudden you live this life completely removed from these things because they're around you all the time. And so what I started to realize is that's what I had been doing with my life, is I had been systematically trying to remove things from my life I knew weren't good for me, even though I desperately still wanted them. And so I was like, just discipline yourself. And that works until it stops working. And I don't know about you, but everyone who like goes on like these kind of, like special diets where you completely eliminate something, very, very, very few of them like that's a new way of life, right? And then
like
all of a sudden,
term, right? Like years later.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they're like back at it, and like you find them. I remember I was doing this exact diet, and we were at a missions conference, and part of this missions conference is that everyone would send their best recipe of cookies. And like, so what would happen is we go on this missions conference, and then down at a table, like downstairs from where we'd meet, they would line up these tables and they just put dozens of homemade cookies, like every lady in the church's best recipe. And so I'm like on this diet, no sugar, no carbs. And I'm in the middle of a meeting. I'm like, have to go to the restroom, and the restroom is right next to the cookies. And I remember I like walked downstairs, and like, I could care less about candy. I don't care about cake, but like homemade cookies are like, they're my weakness, right? And so I'm like, go downstairs, I go to the bathroom, I come out, and I just look at this table, and it's just covered with these cookies. And I literally like blacked out. And when I came to, I had like 14 cookies in my hand, and I was literally like not even holding, I was like eating out of the pile like a ravenous, like wild animal. I'm just like, what happened to me?
Dang.
Like, and so what I realized is, man, these disciplines don't give me the ability to stop wanting these things. What I need is to receive a new set of taste buds. Like, I need my heart to want different things. to actually start to despise certain things. And then I started to realize, wow, for someone who has worked so hard at modifying his behavior, he still wants a lot of those things that are not good for him. He just doesn't partake in them. And then I'm like, is this what Jesus had in mind? For us to simply work super hard to modify our behavior, to follow a certain set of rules, but for our hearts to still feel the same, and our hearts to still want the same things? Or does he want to actually transform us, to change us, to want different things, to want better things, and to invite him to do the change in us, instead of us simply responding to the gospel and saying, now that I'm saved, it's time to like get to work to get rid of this stuff in my life that I don't like.
So there's this, so talk to me now a little bit about, because you use the word discipline, right? And so there's this interesting sort of dichotomy of, we're trying to understand, behavior modification, right? And so we can, you did such a good job sort of describing like, okay, there's particular behaviors that we can choose to change, and we can kind of have these like personal legalisms, or dare we say like discipline ourselves to choose not to, and like fight against our own will. But then we also have like this biblical perspective of like spiritual disciplines and like practicing these spiritual disciplines. So I'm almost curious, like, is there a first? Can me starting my spiritual discipline like prayer or actively reading scripture or fasting, will that lead me to heart transformation? Or is it, I need to make sure, one, of course, I understand the gospel first, and then I have truly like accepted the person of Jesus and have full like fluency and competency of the gospel. And maybe that's that first step to then really, okay, God, change my heart. And then from that step of changing my heart, it will actually be different and put me on a path of transformation versus just me modifying my behavior.
Yeah, I think that's like, it's the chicken or the egg. It's like, what comes first? Like, what I do know is that there's one way that will leave you patting yourself on the back. Man, you have done so good. You have like nailed this like lust thing. Like you've gotten rid of it, or you've like stopped being jealous, because you give yourself a sentence to say every time that you feel jealous or something like that. And ultimately, you know that it's your activity that produced the current result. Then there's the other one, to where like, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Like, the idea of lost and found has nothing to do with the sheep. Like, the sheep didn't like learn how to like navigate to get itself in a position that was easier to be found. It was completely lost, and it had no ability to find its way, and it was desperate, and it's probably even walking the wrong direction, and where Jesus came after it. And so then, if that's the case, you can easily say the only reason I'm changed is because Jesus changed me.
Wow.
He gets all the credit.
And that's really crazy to like we know most of that as believers, but I think even a lot of our young adults listening, right, just to flat out like say this, like, we are the sheep, right? And if we're lost, like you said, like the sheep didn't do any work. Like there was no work that the sheep did to get found. Like you said, to put yourself in a better position to get found by Jesus. It was like, no, you were just completely lost. Jesus did all of the work to find that lost sheep. We are the lost sheep. So that there's something about that pat on the back, right? That subconscious, like, as we're growing, I mean, I'm doing a ton of studies on emerging adulthood, like Generation Z, and there's different things that no matter what generation you've lived in, no matter, if you were born in the year 37, the 1600s or now, there are the same trends with emerging adulthood. When you go from child to adult, there's this emerging adulthood season where we feel like, and we kind of think we get to some place there where we kind of know it all, or we've figured it all out. And and Satan can jump in, and he wants to use and abuse that, and he wants to get you to think that you are contributing to being more spiritually mature, that you are the reason now that you are more spiritually mature. Now, sure, there's decisions that you made, but talk to me a little bit about that. I feel like that's kind of this, that's here right now, and that's where Satan can tempt us and get us off track, is because we are subconsciously or very consciously patting ourselves on the back.
Yeah, I totally see that. And I think that's one of the biggest enemies of transformation. Because I think that when we start to like look at ourselves and be like, so say you look at like the fruits of the Spirit, right? Like peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, love, like all these different fruits of the Spirit. And you're just like, I'm gonna become more loving. I'm gonna choose to love more. And you like go out there and you're like, I'm gonna like start with love, end with love, like love wins, like this whole like idea. But the capacity to love over a long period of time in to people who are really unlovable has to come from a power greater than yourself. You are not a power great enough to do that. There has to be a power bigger than that acting on you, empowering you to do that. And I really believe that our ability to forgive, our ability to be kind, our ability to love, our ability to be patient, all those things are directly connected with our understanding of how kind, how loving, how patient, and how good Jesus has been to us. The more you realize Jesus has forgiven you, and you're just brutally honest, the easier it is going to be to forgive the people around you. Because you'll be like, who am I to not forgive when I've been forgiven so much? Like, how could I not? The ability to fight for justice, right? Like, is directly connected with seeing how hard and what extent Jesus went to fight for you, right? Like, he went to the nth degree, became a human, was ridiculed, lost his friendships, like was ridiculed by his family, rejected, despised, like beaten, treated as a criminal. Like, he went to what degree? So who am I to not go to similar degrees? So like when you start to understand what Jesus has done for me, not what I have done for me, my work has done for me, but what he did for me, then you start to become changed, I believe.
So talking to getting to that, right? So transformation, I want to bring in the world events for a little bit. And let me be honest, like when I start thinking about transformation and being transformed by Jesus Christ because he has saved me, I start realizing, my weaknesses and my own immaturities. And as the Christian, like I know that there are parts in my heart and in my whole self and my soul that still have a lot of work to do and still need the continual work of the gospel to transform me, because I get defensive and because I can elevate other identities in my life above my identity in Christ, because of how passionate I'll like respond to something or think something even in my brain, versus not living out the primary identity as a son of God or as a Christ follower, right? And so when those other voices, I can sense them, like, right, the scale just like, whoa, like why does this feel so imbalanced? And seeing a lot of voices come out, in the last week, and I'm wondering, man, is my political identity primary to my Christ identity? Am I speaking? Are my proportions of passion and vision, are they healthily like proportionate to where they should be as a Christ follower versus like where I'm landing on some other things? So like, have I ever spoken this passionately about the gospel and following Jesus and my identity in Christ and salvation, forgiveness, versus how passionately I might be speaking right now about a particular topic? So, I mean, where's the transformation? Talk to me. Like, that's for me been convicting.
Yeah, I get it. And I look at this whole thing because all these, so let's start with COVID, and then we'll move into the whole racial reconciliation type of things. So COVID has made us behave differently. Like, it has demanded behavior modification.
Wow.
Right? Whether or not you like agree with it, whether or not you like think it's a, like the most real significant plague that has hit the earth since the Spanish flu, and it's something to treat super seriously, or whether you think it's a giant conspiracy to get
that's the spectrum. Yeah.
Like, right, the spectrum, right?
Yes.
You have been required to modify your behavior.
Yes.
Now, where you land on that spectrum will determine how long you allow your behavior to be modified. So I know a lot of people who have they've totally exited the whole idea of following any of the rules, right? And they're just living life. And then I know other people who are super still concerned about it, mainly because they are deeply connected with someone and are in contact with someone who is really susceptible. And so you have like these different views. And so like, what would transformation look like in that versus just behavior modification? Like a transformed mind or transformed heart would be like, okay, what am I willing to do and what allowances and changes am I going to make in my life or not make in my life? Am I going to do, because how real is this and how serious it is, and who am I willing to give up my rights for in order to make sure that someone else isn't negatively affected, right? And so I have a great example. One of my good friends, he had a daughter during this whole thing, and really early at 30 weeks.
Whoa.
And so the daughter is in the ICU, the NICU, and he can't see her. If he literally can't go to visit her if he has been in contact with anyone who shows like signs of having COVID or might have COVID or had COVID. So block him out for 2 weeks of seeing his daughter. He is like not going anywhere. He is not doing anything. He is like sticking to the rules to the nth degree because, the price for him missing that opportunity is too high. And so I'm thinking, so if I know I'm going to have contact with him in some sort, like that, like makes me want to like care more about like his well-being and his ability to visit his daughter. So that changes the way that I interact with people around me, and so it starts to change my view on this, and not just do I think this is real, or does it really bother me, or is it worth caring about? And then I start to be like, wow, like how do I need to be changed in order to want the best for as many people as possible?
You're moving from
what am I being brought up?
Thinking about yourself to then thinking about others. It's transforming your view of your relationships, and then how you view people. What is your mission, right? Because then you're aligning your mission with his mission. His mission is to see his daughter.
Yes. And
so you're going to transform this, whatever people have all these sorts of different perspectives, and you're going to align with that. That's really helpful.
So that makes it easier for me to follow the rules all of a sudden, right? It's not, are you serious? This is so lame. It's like, oh, I can do this for him.
Wow.
I can do this for him. Like, and it changes your approach and attitude towards it. So let's transfer to the whole racial reconciliation thing. Is what I really believe that disenfranchised communities desire is for people to feel differently about them. But I don't think that they believe that that's a reality. So they at least are demanding that they are treated differently. So I feel like there's this mass movement about rights and about how we're treated, right? Like these things are treated, but what they're wanting people is to feel differently about them. Because if I feel differently about my neighbor, I will treat them better. But if I simply like treat them better, I can still feel negative things towards them, but be behaving in ways that, you know, are appropriate or even like, you know, thoughtful. And so like Jesus says that, right? He's talking to all these Pharisees in Matthew 15, and he's like you honor me with your lips, and it's a prophecy from Isaiah, but your hearts are far from me. And so I think what's happening is, how do we have our hearts change towards an entire demographic of people that it once felt one way about, or that society feels one way about? And it has to come from inner transformation. You have to have surgery done on your heart to remove pieces that are broken that you can't do yourself. Like, you can't perform like heart surgery on yourself. You need someone to do it for you. And so I think like this whole idea, God, change my heart, is a literal prayer. And like, I think that maybe being exposed to things, it helps you to be sensitive, because God's like, I always picture it this way. I have like a 10-year-old, and a lot of times I like point to something. I'm all, hey, look at that. And he's like, wait, what? I'm all, that. He's like, what? And so I grab his head and I put it next to my cheek, and then I turn, I'm all, look at that. And then all of a sudden he's seeing my exact view, and he's like, oh. And I think that is what God is doing through a lot of these, you know, like protests and a lot of these like exposures, is he's saying, hey, do you see what I see?
Wow.
But just seeing it doesn't mean that you've allowed him to change you. And that's the hard part, is there are so many Christians, people who are followers of Jesus, who have agreed in principle with his ways, but haven't given him permission to change their hearts. And I think that's how you get your heart changed, is you recognize, number one, I'm still broken. Number two, I need to start to become available. Like, I need to lay everything out. And if change requires the way I currently live, it changes my socioeconomic status, it changes my pathway forward, it changes the way I view my 401k, it changes how I view my summers, it changes like what I do with school, changes where I work, changes how much I demand I get paid. Like, if I'm willing to lay all of those before God and say, change any of it, any and all things that need to be changed, I'm giving you permission to enter in. That's, I think, when we experience full transformation, not just being saved from hell, or not just, you know, like, you know, having some, you know, like understanding of Jesus's sacrifice, but to be changed by him is when we lay ourselves before him.
Yeah. And I think just to, cause we brought it up and we want to talk about it, just so Grove Young Adults, you hear from me directly, I don't want there to be any confusion. We see that Jesus was anti-racism. And
oh, yeah.
So that's obviously very, I mean,
sure.
Not everyone can necessarily agree on certain nuances, but as far as like where I stand, where the Grove stands, we look at Jesus' life. And there's so many examples. One being the woman at the well. I mean, there's so many different things, but we line up with that as followers of Jesus, as a church, the Grove Community Church. We're anti-racism, and there are nuances, there are prejudices, there are biases that we have to grow in, that we have to recognize, that we have to bring to the Lord and the Holy Spirit and say, we need to repent of these things. These have been ingrained within me from them being modeled by my family, and so on and so forth. And so there's more that we're going to continue to talk about when it comes to racial injustice, when it comes to really talking through healing and growing and moving toward righteousness and Christ-likeness in that topic. And that's the thing that I want Grove Young Adults, you to hear from me, is that this is an ongoing, lifelong dialogue, journey of actually seeking Christ-like transformation, that because of, like you said, Tim, the power, not from us, the power coming from the gospel and Christ himself that's where the power comes from to actually do the work of change, because it does take power. And we're tempted on our willpower. I'm tempted on my willpower to change, but it's going to be from gospel Christ power that that leads to our transformation. So Tim, if you're like talking to your son and you're like breaking this down, like behavior modification versus like actual true authentic life transformation, give me, I mean, is there a closing thought that you're just like, if there's anything that I want you to get, if there's anything that I want you to know, what would that be for us?
So I'll just 3 quick things. I think one thing is to become available. I think available to change. Stop defending the way you think.
Wow.
And start being open to God taking. So I think it's really great. You set ideals that are thought through and prayed through.
Sure.
And then you revisit those ideals to see if they are still ideal. And then you pray through them again and let God make new things, the new ideal in your life, so that you are constantly giving him room and permission to change over and over, deeper and deeper. I think it makes a change. We fall in love with it. And all of a sudden we have a 1980s like decoration in our house. And it is like, but we loved it. It was the best when we got it done. And then the 90s and the 2010, you know, like you see people who fell in love with an era and now you walk in and you're like, ooh, like, is that what you still want? You know? And I think the same thing. Give God permission and become available. Number 2, actually, like, I think the most significant is understand that the same one who saved you is the one who's going to change you.
Oof.
Like, Jesus didn't come to save and leave us to change. And so I really believe that when we understand that, not only is he the one that rescues us, but he's the one that teaches us, that sits with us. And I think of even shepherds, right? Like a shepherd rescues a sheep, and if it keeps running off, the shepherd would sometimes break the sheep's leg and then carry the sheep around his neck until the sheep trusted the shepherd and they were close enough that he knew that I don't stray from you. You are where my safety is. And then he would reset them, and then the sheep would understand. And it was like this whole process, like, yeah, I saved you, but then even sometimes through pain and suffering and being broken, you are helping me to change, to trust you more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And that regardless of what we think we can accomplish, what he accomplishes is so much greater. And so letting him change us, I think, is terrifying in some sense, because, like, what's he going to do? What's it going to take? Do I want him really to have permission? But then to also think back, what if I had tried to save myself? Where would I be? What would be the end result if I relied on my own good works and stood before God instead of Jesus' sacrifice? Why would he not only save me, but why would he not go further and give me the best possible life by changing me in all the ways I need to be changed? So be open to that.
I love it. So we condensed to 2.
Sure.
From 3 to 2. I love it. No, that's good. I like just 2 things for us. Man, thank you again for being with us. This was encouraging and convicting for me, always provoking. And so that's our heart. Grow Young Adults know this, that, man, we want to be getting into topics that challenge us, not just topics that appease, our minds a little bit. And then we can just go back to doing life the same way. Like, we want to be receiving a word that makes us uncomfortable, because it's pushing us toward Christ-likeness, and growing toward Jesus and holiness is really uncomfortable, but it's because it's good for us. And that's what God wants to do as he works on us and refines us. So thank you again, Tim. So thankful for this. You've left us with a lot to chew on, and so the groups will be meeting and discussing this. And so, yeah, I just want to say thank you again and hope to have you back at some point.
Yeah, love you guys.